What's up guys, CJ here and welcome back to Hybrid Network's review of Stranger Things Season 2. And to get this out of the way right up front, this is going to be spoiler free, or as spoiler free as I can possibly be. I don't want to ruin anything in the show for you guys. I am going to mention a handful of plot points as they relate to objectively how I felt about the show, but nothing that gives away the major reveals or ending of the season. So fair warning there, as spoiler free as I can possibly get it while expressing my feelings about the show. First things first, this season is tonally much darker than the first I felt, but at the same time it's almost also has more humor, if that makes sense. The horror's been amped up and there are more genuinely disturbing parts in this season, but at the same time the humor is much more blatant and on the nose, and honestly I don't feel like the show suffered at all for either of those choices. On the whole, this season is also much less streamlined and interconnected than the first, with multiple new storylines, some of which connect back to the main plot and some of which kind of just end, either to be returned to in future seasons or maybe not at all, who knows. I mean, just an example, in one corner you have a story about Will and what's happening to him, because he's at the center of this whole thing once again. You also have Lucas and Dustin competing for Max's affection, Jonathan and Nancy trying to get the truth out there, that's as much as I'll say about that, and Eleven searching for her mother and finding something of a family, and even more, believe it or not. One of the major improvements from this season over the last has to be kind of the nuance. I mean, this year feels much more subtle in a lot of ways than last season, which was pretty morally black and white in my opinion. I mean, characters this year feel much more dynamic and much more human, if that makes sense. For example, the face of the government in last season was Dr. Brenner, played by Matthew Modine, and he was a pretty cut and dry villain. I feel like we can say that. He was very two-dimensional in my opinion, and that's no fault of Modine, that's just the way the character was written. But in stark contrast, this season's government stooge is Paul Reiser's Dr. Owens, and despite being a bureaucrat and kicking the can of the problem down the road in a pretty big way, he genuinely is a good person. He's a major ally for the protagonist of the show, rather than being almost a secondary villain like Brenner was. Another good example, Max's older brother Billy, played by the Red Ranger himself, Dacre Montgomery. I mean, he does spend most of the season as a massive dick, and he is set up as an antagonist, but it's more in how he's an abusive piece of shit that interferes with their plan and gets in the way in a big way, but he's not like objectively evil. There's layers to him too. And the same can even be said for characters like Callie, who you probably have heard nothing about, but you definitely will know right from the get-go this season. Her intentions are noble, she's getting revenge for a good reason, but her methods are less than pure, to say the least, and even still, she's more or less on the side of the angels by the end of this season. But one of the real highlights of the season was the flipping of the script with Will. He goes from being the victim in the first season to kind of something of a victim again, a hostage, but also an unwitting accomplice for the season's big bad, the Mind Flayer. And it's really spectacular, it's a great effective twist that gives this season real stakes and skin in the game. This also serves to give Winona Ryder some really interesting new ground to explore. I mean, gone is the frantic, desperate mother going to the ends of the earth to find her son, and now she's in a much more desperate position, honestly. She's trying to save her son and having to wrestle with the fact that he's essentially unwillingly trying to bring about the end of the world, and there will be a point where you think that maybe she's going too far. There's honestly a lot to love about this season, especially for the fans of the first one, but it is not perfect. While I think the way Barb was killed off and no one seemed to care was one of the major flaws of the first year, the fact that justice for Barb actually literally creeps into this season was played more than a little heavy-handed in my opinion. It almost felt like a direct response to the flack they got from critics and fans than a necessary plotline, and it does tie back in at the very end. It feels more like setup for next season and future seasons as a whole than a necessary element in this one. Stranger Things 2 does only have 9 episodes, so it didn't really suffer from the Netflix sag that so many of their other longer shows do, but that arc was probably the best example that filler still kind of exists, or filler exists in a way, I guess, because it does tie back into the main story, but at the time you're kind of sitting there wondering, it's like, do we really need to be here? There's a lot more important stuff going on back with the other people. The season also kind of feels just a little bit predictable in some spots, and there are more than a few moments where you'll definitely be able to call what happens before it does happen. I'm not going to give you any specifics because it does show up in some pretty big scenes, but trust me, you will absolutely know when you're watching it. And this last one is a little bit nitpicky, but there were a few places where I felt like some of the choices they made were mainly for fan service. I mean, okay, example, who did we love first season? I feel like most people would say their favorite characters were Eleven and Chief Hopper. So you know what, we're gonna throw them together for a good chunk of the season, kind of a father-daughter storyline. And you know what, you love Galen Matarazzo, me too. Here's more of Dustin being really funny. And the Justice for Barb stuff is another good example. It's stuff that fans care about that I feel like they threw in mainly because fans care about it, if that makes sense. Not necessarily because it needed to be in there. I mean, like I said, it's a nitpicky gripe. I'm all for fan service, but there are some moments where you're sitting there going, okay, I enjoy this, but it does feel a little forced. That being said, there is still way more good than bad in this season of Stranger Things, and if you loved the first, you'll definitely love the second. And if you didn't love the first, well, chances are you'll probably still feel the same way, since it is still very much the same show, but they have made some changes, so give it another chance. This season doesn't have the benefit the first season had of coming out of nowhere and kind of shocking everyone to become this cultural phenomenon. But that being said, it does live up to the hype established by the first season, in my opinion, and for that, you know, and I'll say it was probably better than the first season. Overall, I'll give Season 2 of Stranger Things an 8.5 out of 10. Let me know what you thought if you finished the season in the comments section down below, but that's going to do it for me here. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to smash that like if you like what you saw, subscribe for more great content every single day, and consider turning on your notifications to be alerted every time we upload a new video. For even more content, check out our website at hybridnetworkyt.com, and if you love HN and want to take your support to the next level, consider donating to us on Patreon as we strive to bring you the best content possible. Signing off, this is CJ, and I'll see you next time.